is that time. Listen, it is that time for you and I to be in the space and place. The space and place, listen, that we call RUFF'N IT. Listen, the space and place, listen, where you and I begin to unpack relationship baggage. That's right, listen, you and I need to know how to unpack relationship baggage. We know that we bring relationship baggage to the table, but the question is, do you know how to unpack it? Well, listen, today, this is exactly what we want to be able to do. And so listen, you know that there's a space and place here for all relationships. And because there's a space and place for all relationships, listen, we understand that we're not just here by ourselves. And because we're not just here by ourselves, listen, we want to make sure that we are bringing those that are in relationship with us. And so listen, as you are here on YouTube, I want to make sure, listen, that you are subscribing to our YouTube page. Listen, I want to make sure, listen, that not only you subscribing to our YouTube page, but I want to make sure, listen, that you're hitting that bell icon so that when we go live, listen, you can be ready, you can be notified, because listen, we go live at various times, and I always want to make sure that you aren't missing anything that we have to offer. And so listen, if you're here on Facebook, listen, we want to make sure that you're not only with us on Facebook today, but listen, you're on Facebook whenever we come on Facebook. And so listen, for those of you that are there on Facebook, I want to make sure that you like our page. I want to make sure that, listen, you're hitting that bell icon. Yeah, YouTube has a bell icon. Now Facebook has a bell icon. I want to make sure that you hit that bell icon so that when we go live, once again, you can know about it. And here's the last but not least. We want to make sure that we're like, make sure that we share, and make sure that we're following. That's right, listen. Make sure that we like, make sure that we share, and make sure that we follow. Because I'm telling you today, listen, that if there's anything that really speaks to you today, if there's anything that really causes you to have the needle moved in your relationship, listen, it's worth you sharing that with someone else. Because if it helped move the needle in your relationship, I promise you it's going to help move the needle in their relationship. Whether they're in relationship with you or not, listen, we are here to really maximize relationships. And because, listen, that is what we do. We thank you for joining us. We thank you for being here with us. And listen, we want to go ahead and get started today as we are unpacking relationship baggage. And so, listen, today, listen, as you see on the screen, there's a quote that I have on the screen. And listen, it's by a person by the name of John Bowlby. And he says the propensity to make strong emotional bonds to particular individuals is a basic component of human nature. Listen, he says for you and I to have an attachment, for you and I to have an emotional attachment, he says that it's within our human nature. Now, you know, one of the things that we like to do here also, and if you're joining us for the first time today, listen, we welcome you. We thank you for being here. One of the things that we like to do is to put different images on the screen, because we understand that sometimes when we talk about how we learn, some people are audio, so some people are listening to this, not really watching. Some people are visual learners. They need to see the information. Some of us are a combination of the two. We need to see and hear the information. And so listen, so we put these different images on the screen to help you and I along the way as it relates to really digesting what it is that we're talking about here. Well, not only are we talking about unpacking our relationship baggage, but we often like to look at what does that mean when we talk about spirit, soul, and body. We recognize that we are not just individuals that are just physical. We're not individuals that are just emotional, but we are individuals that are spiritual also. And so here, when you look here at this particular passage that I have here on the screen, actually I have more than one today because I want you to see that this, what we're talking about, is not just for a particular type of relationship. So here in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, Genesis 2, verse 24, it says, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Now here, when we see this passage, we know that this is in relationship to marriage. For those of you that are familiar with any sort of biblical scriptures as it relates to marriage, even if you aren't, you probably heard this at a marriage, at a wedding ceremony, marriage seminar of some sort. And this is often referenced, whether you're a Christian or not, this is just one that's often referenced. Well, I want you to know that there's other scriptures that really speak to this topic that we're covering today. And so here, not only do you find it here, but listen, I want you to see that here, even in this passage, Genesis, it mentions this word cleave. It mentions this word cleave, and this is going to be important as we look at even some other passages that I'm going to pull up here for you. So when we look here at this next one, notice now here in Ruth, it says, and they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. Notice now, and then it says that Ruth clave. Another way of saying cleave says that Ruth clave unto her, speaking about her mother-in-law. Notice now, and this is what Ruth goes on to say to her mother-in-law. Verse 16, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee. Now I'm reading from the King James Version, which is like Old English. And notice it says, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. Verse 17, where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So here we see not only is this term cleave as it relates to marriage, but we see even here that this term cleave is being used as it relates to this daughter-in-law and this mother-in-law. Once again, a family relationship and a bond. And so not only is it in Genesis and in Ruth, but I want you to see that it's even in another passage here. In 1 Samuel 18, verse 3, it's in the New King James Version. It says, then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And so even though it doesn't mention the word cleave here, when you begin to understand what cleave looks like and what cleave means, here even David and Jonathan has this cleaving type connection in their relationship. So when we begin to look at emotional attachments, or we talk about bonding, we understand that even from a scriptural, spiritual perspective, that cleaving is something that happens to us on all levels. It happens to us on a spiritual level. It happens to us on an emotional level. It happens to us on a physical level. And because there is the cleaving that takes place in this dynamic, it's important for you and I to therefore understand it, because when you talk about a relationship, you talk about a healthy relationship, cleaving has to be a part of it. And so here, when we're seeing here that this term cleave is being used, We are understanding that cleave has to do with a gluing. It is coming together. It's an intertwining of persons coming together. And just like glue or some adhesive that we put together on a paper, or we're gluing something together, it is that glue that causes it to stick. It is that glue that once it dries, listen, once it has dried, and if you're using something like super glue or gorilla glue, it doesn't even take the whole drying process to be complete before there is an adhesiveness, before there is this component that causes those two things to be attached. And when you and I are talking about a relationship, whether we're talking about a husband and wife, whether we're talking about a colleague, whether we're talking about friendships, or we're talking about a neighborly relationship, any relationship that is going to have long-term or longevity to it is going to have this component called cleaving within the dynamics of it. When we talk about that word cleaving in psychology, or we talk about it in our today's term, we talk about it as it relates to an attachment, or we talk about it as it relates to a bonding. And sometimes we don't really talk about bonding as it relates to adults. We talk about bonding with the child, bonding with the infant. But I'm telling you that when you and I begin to progress into adulthood, that you and I begin to understand that cleaving, bonding, attaching is important for any relationship that you and I are going to have with another individual. And so therefore, although the Bible uses this old English term called cleaving, we understand that if you and I are going to have good, wholehearted relationships today, that we're going to refer to it as bonding and being attached. But I think that it's something worth noting when we look here. If I kind of go back to this first passage, and we see here where, let me pull it up right here. Notice now, it says this: therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and he shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Here's what I would tell you, that when you talk about cleaving after the household, I would tell you that, listen, if one has not learned healthy cleaving within the household, or one has experienced unhealthy cleaving, bonding, and attaching in the household, I'm telling you, it sets the person up for a lot of challenges outside the house. Because here, if it's saying, listen, that one is to leave his or her house and cleave to their spouse, if they haven't learned healthy cleaving in the house, how are they going to now leave the house and have healthy cleaving with someone outside of their house? And what you and I know is that before we ever get to a place of marital relationship, that we've had a lot of relationships along the way in which there should have been some bonding, there should have been some healthy adhesiveness, there should have been some healthy attaching. And if we have not experienced a good foundation in the house, and now we're moving through the relationship here outside the house, then it could be that this is why by the time we get to marriage, or by the time we get to adulthood, that we've had so much unhealthy cleaving, we've had so much unhealthy bonding, that now when we are expected to know how to do this in relationships that are a little more permanent, relationships that have a little more significance and a little more meaning, then this may explain why we run into the kind of attachment issues and bonding and cleaving that we do. And this may even speak to why there are some of the challenges that we see in marriages today, because this cleaving was a part of the spiritual dynamic, as well as a part of the emotional, as well as a part of the physical. And so listen, I want to really unpack some of this today. I don't know how much we will get past this or get through this, but I really want us to be able to unpack this. Now, listen, one of the things that I always say to you is that if you have any kind of questions, you can always post those here on our Facebook page. You can post those here on our YouTube page. I can see those questions if you're posting those at this time. And so I just want you to know, listen, we want to talk about unhealthy baggage, unhealthy relationship baggage. And part of one of the things that we're covering today is this emotional bonding, attachment type challenges. And so, listen, I'm pastor and therapist Marcus, and I am glad to have you here with us today. And so we've been looking at, look, why is this so important? Why is talking about baggage, relationship baggage important? Is because when we understand just what we just read so far, that by the time you and I have reached adulthood, we inevitably carry some type of emotional baggage with us. Because as much as we have read this passage and we've seen these examples, the reality is that we're dealing with fallible people. We're dealing with persons that have not necessarily got it right in all of these different areas as it relates to emotional attachment and healthy bonding, that normally somewhere along the lines we've had some relationships that have gone south. We've had some things that have not gone well. And so if we have not really recovered, we have not bounced back, or maybe we haven't even learned the important pieces to the puzzle as relates to emotional bonding, then I'm telling you, then it's going to set us up for all types of sometimes false expectations, misleading expectations. And we're going to have more challenges than not because we didn't have a good, healthy start. We didn't really have a good, healthy beginning. And so now we're trying to figure it out along the way. How do we put these pieces together? And so therefore, this is why talking about this subject becomes so important, because some of us are carrying more baggage than others. The problem isn't that you and I have more baggage than one or another. The problem is, how have we dealt with it? Are we aware of it? What are we doing about it? Because we know that we've gotten some along the way. The question is, what have we done with it since we've started packing our baggage with this unhealthy emotional bonding, this unhealthy emotional attachment? And so here, as we are going forward, we've said that relationship baggage is the difficult or the painful things that we've gone through in past relationships that tend to follow us into future relationships. Let me say that again. It's the difficult and painful things that we've gone through in past relationships. Now listen, this can be professional relationships. This can be family relationships. This is not limited to any particular category or area. It is just the reality that along the way, we've gotten some relationship baggage. And sometimes we carry that baggage when we go into the next relationship on the job, when we go into the next relationship in the career. We take that baggage when we are interacting with other family members because of what happened with these family members in the past, or other family members in our extended family. And so we've got to be aware that there's this baggage that comes along the way, so that, listen, when our suitcases are filling up, we are aware of it, we can do something about it, because we understand that this is important to unpack. Let me say that again. This is important to unpack. And so listen, we've been looking at, one of the things we talked about last week was unpacking core beliefs. What are the kind of thoughts that we bring to the table that make relationship baggage difficult? Because not everybody has healthy core beliefs about relationships and about people and about ourselves. And so therefore, we've got to unpack that. But we did that last week. If you missed that, you can go to our YouTube page or to our Facebook our YouTube channel, may I say, or our Facebook page, and be able to see what we talked about last week. But here this week, listen, we want to talk about this baggage as it relates to, listen, relationship patterns, relationship attachments, and how we bond with people. That's right, listen, relationships, attachments, and how we bond with people. Because what we do understand is that all of us, listen, when you understand that we are hardwired, listen, for connection, and everyone wants a meaningful relationship. Listen, I don't care whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Everyone is wired. This is a part, that's the reason why I read the quote that I read. It's a part of our DNA. It's a part of who we are. That we come to the table, listen, wanting to have relationships with other humans. And so, listen, because we were pre-programmed to bond, we come to the table looking to have this kind of connection and interaction. But the question is, listen, that pre-programming is set up for a dynamic that we're looking to experience, hopefully with other healthy individuals. But the reality is that as much as they can be healthy, there's probably some unhealthiness that they are still bringing to the table. And so we're going to learn some good things along the way. We're going to learn some bad things along the way. Listen, we're going to learn some challenging things along the way. And hopefully it's a good balance. At the same time, we know that some of us did not have a healthy balance. We've had more of an unhealthy imbalance. And so we've learned more negative than good. We know more about what we don't like than what it should look like. And so we've got to be able to unpack that so that we can really understand how do we now bring all this so that it works for us and not against us. And so here, when we go back to the scripture and it says that one is to leave their house and cleave to their spouse, you and I have to understand that what happened in those initial relationships made a world of a difference. Let me say that again. What happened in those initial relationships? What happened with your mom? What happened with your dad? What happened with those who were responsible for taking care of you? I recognize that not everybody was necessarily raised by their biological parents. Some people that may be watching this were raised by their grandparents. Maybe they were raised by aunt or uncle. Maybe they were raised in a foster home. Maybe they were raised by some other individual. And so it's not the biological parent. But here's what I'm telling you. For what I'm describing, what we're talking about today, it didn't matter whether it was the biological parents or not. What mattered is who were they as emotional individuals. How healthy were they? How unhealthy were they? What did they know? What did they not know? Because that is what impacted you and I from the get-go. What happened in your home? What kind of good emotional stability and nourishment were you given so that you had a good start? See, if you and I did not have a good start, listen, it determines, now not that it finalizes, I'm not saying this is finality, but I am saying that, listen, this does begin to set the stage for how you and I are to move forward. And so therefore, listen, that foundation makes a difference for how emotional attachments will flow and go in our lives from that moment forward. See, when I talk to you about these attachments or I talk about this bonding, when you look at this from a research standpoint, there's actually two different types of bonding that happens. Here you can see on the screen that the first one is what we call a secure attachment or a secure bond. This type of attachment or this type of bond is just that. It's secure. It's the kind of bond that gave you that initial sense that you were safe, the world was safe, your environment was safe. It basically said that, listen, I'm caring for you, your needs are important. So when you cried as a baby, there was somebody to attend to you. Listen, when you needed to have those Pampers changed, there was somebody to tend to you. Listen, when you had emotional needs, right? It wasn't because you were hungry, it was because you just needed some touching, you needed some cuddling, you need somebody to just wrap their arms around you and just tell you all kind of wonderful things about you. That kind of establishment, as much as we may consider for some of us, well, that's just normal. Isn't that what is the kind of the regular template? And if I was to tell you that is the healthy template, that is not necessarily always the normal template. Therefore, there are people who are listening, or people that we may know that, listen, they did not have that kind of secure attachment. And when you don't have a secure attachment, and I just mentioned some basic things that gives that kind of secure attachment. Listen, if you grew up in a home where, listen, there was a lot of yelling, screaming, arguing, a lot of violence and fighting, listen, that can disrupt the kind of secure attachment that under healthy, regular, normal situations may not have been your experience. And therefore, this impacts how well you don't bond with other people. And when you begin to understand that a lot of this had to do with what happened initially. Now, not everything, but a lot of this had to do with what happened initially. Therefore, listen, people that had a good start, they had a secure attachment, they had a good bond. Listen, these are people that are more prone to be self-confident. They're more prone to, listen, to trust. They're more prone, listen, to look at situations with a hopeful eye. Listen, they have the ability often to manage conflict, to be in a situation and to not kind of lose themselves in the midst of differences or disagreements. These are the kind of persons, listen, that can respond well to intimacy. I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about intimacy. How well do you allow others to come into your emotional space? How well can you enter into somebody else's emotional space? Is entering into that emotional space like a foreign affair? Is it like a place like a puzzle with 1,000 different pieces and you have no clue on where to start and where to begin or what to do? Or you get so far in that you get really lost because you're not really comfortable or you're not really cognizant about how to move and navigate in those areas. This is where your start could have impacted why you are where you are currently. And so this is why they call it a secure bond, a secure attachment. Listen, this is the kind of thing that happens so that, listen, parents can create meaningful relationships with their children. Listen, they're able to know how to connect, and they're able to know how to have good boundaries and how to have a good relationship, emotional relationship. This is why I'm telling you that the secure attachment, for some of us, we've taken it for granted, but the reality is that unless this has been really a sturdy foundation for you, I am telling you that this is what can create challenges for how well we bond or don't bond with others. And so therefore, it starts off with the secure one. But as you can imagine, listen, the next one would be, as you see on the screen, the insecure attachment or bond. The insecure attachment or bond. Listen, this is when, listen, you've had more confusion than you've had clarity. This is when, listen, you've had more inconsistency than you've had consistency. This is when, listen, you've had more of fear than you've had safety. And when, listen, you've grown up in an environment in which it entailed the kind of things that just said, I really can't predict what's going to happen around here. I've come home, I don't know if we're going to have enough food. I come home, I don't know if my parents or caregivers are going to be there. I come home, listen, I don't know if the police are going to be at my house or not. I come home, I don't know, listen, if I'm even going to have all my belongings. Maybe, my parents were on drugs and they were selling things. And so all of a sudden, I begin to lose possessions. All sorts of things can happen in those childhood years that really makes attaching difficult. And so therefore, listen, when this has been more of your experience, listen, it is hard for you to be in a relationship and to be comfortable. And listen, it's hard for you to be in a relationship and to know that someone is caring and loving enough to take care of your needs and that they're reliable and that they're dependable. Listen, this is the kind of thing that can create all kind of trust issues. This is the kind of thing that, listen, can make it difficult for you to allow others into your emotional, personal space. No matter how much they've proven themselves to be consistent, reliable, dependable, and trustworthy, you will always wonder in the back of your mind, is there something I'm not seeing? Is there something that's missing? Because I don't feel comfortable. And sometimes you can't always put your finger on it. You can't always understand it or articulate it. But it's just something that sometimes we say is a gut reaction. And not all gut reactions come from healthy gut places. And so therefore, listen, you're more likely to have what we call an insecure attachment or insecure bond. And so listen, you often, persons of this caliber or persons in this group, often, listen, they have difficulties around just having emotional conversations and the stability that comes around, that comes along with it. They can often have challenges with maintaining stable relationships. They're used to people, maybe not being there long enough or staying long enough. And so they don't really open up to others long enough because they don't really trust that you are going to be there or that you are going to really live out what you say that you're going to live out and do. And so therefore, listen, they can find it difficult to connect with others. This is where sometimes you get persons that can be very clingy, right? It's like, hey, hold up, it's almost like it's hard for you to have healthy space because they're just constantly wondering, are you going to be there? Are you going to come back? Are you going to be available? Are you somebody that is trustworthy? They can be the kind of person that, listen, have difficulties with just being present because it's something that they really don't know how to do. And it's funny, when they've done the research on these two different types, those that are secure and those that are insecure, they have found that about 50, let me make sure I'm saying this right, about 50 to 60% of people have a secure attachment or bonding relationship. But then they found that about 40 to 50% of people don't have secure or they have insecure attachment bonding type issues. So that says that, listen, 1 out of every 2 persons that you know are having some kind of challenge in bonding. They're having some kind of challenge when it comes to emotionally attaching and cleaving and being secure in that relationship. And so therefore, understanding this about you, understanding this about others that you're in relationship with, listen, this goes 1,000 miles. Because when I understand this about those that I'm connected to, it helps me to understand why they say some of the things they say, why they act some of the ways that they act, why they believe some of the things that they believe. Because I understand that this is what has shaped and molded. And even though this may not, listen, have been something that happened in their primary home, this may have been something that happened in some experience along the way. Because remember, by the time that we are adults, listen, we've had a lot of relationships. And so whether you talk about with teachers, you talk about with family members, you talk about with neighbors. And sometimes along the way, different things have occurred. Some bad things have happened, and it damaged, it injured, listen, it handicapped people. And it's just the reality that, listen, if you're one of those persons, this is not about shaming. This is not about feeling guilty. This is simply about recognizing I have some attachment challenges. And listen, I have some real good, secure attachment structures. It doesn't matter where we may find ourselves, or it may be, you know what, I'm doing pretty good, when it comes to bonding and it comes to attaching. But you know what? Here's where I may struggle. And I would say if you're struggling, in some subcomponent area, it may be worthwhile to look back and say, is this because of what happened over here? Is this related to what happened over there? Why? Because if I can now pinpoint where this comes from, I quit taking it out on people that have nothing to do with it. Let me say that again. If I can pinpoint where this comes from, I can quit taking it out on people that have nothing to do with it. Because how many times is it that we are now comparing and contrasting somebody because of what happened over here, and we're saying, hey, you remind me of that person. You remind me of this situation. You remind me of that scenario. And that may be good when we talk about principles and we talk about hey, here are the flags and warning signs. That's good information. But when we just generalize it and we just say that, hey, you're just like this person, and we haven't really kind of unpacked that, we could very well be missing out on a good, wholesome relationship simply because we haven't unpacked our own baggage. We haven't unpacked our own baggage. And when it comes to bonding, listen, you and I need to understand these attachment issues, these attachment structures, these attachment challenges, because they influence all of our relationships. They influence our parenting. They influence, listen, our friendships. They influence our marriages. They influence, listen, our spiritual relationships, church relationship. It influences everything in every way, because everywhere you go, you take you. Everywhere you go, you take you. And when you begin to see patterns, when you begin to see, hold up, these things keep showing up, I've got to trace where is this coming from. Because if not, I just keep blaming people, when in all honesty, the problem comes back to me. And so therefore, I just want to highlight that, and I just want to highlight just a few more things as we're talking about these attachment issues. So notice now, there are these two categories when we talk about attachment or we talk about bonding. There are two different categories. There's the secure attachment bond. There's the insecure attachment bond. Now, with that being said, I want to talk to you about three others that are important. Now, this first one here is what we call the ambivalent attachment bond. The ambivalent attachment bond. Now, listen, this is like a subcategory of an insecure attachment. And so we know that there's the insecure part there, But then there's this ambivalent part, right? Where this person, listen, there can be fear, there can be anxiety. Listen, this is the kind of person that can really question to an unhealthy degree the other person's love for them. There's such a nervousness and such a fearfulness that it's almost as if the other person can't say enough, can't do enough to be able to prove that when they say I love you, that when they say I care about you, that it's always something lingering in the back that says, I don't know if I can trust that. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's real or not. And although we recognize that, yeah, people are fallible and yeah, people will sometimes, in their growth and development will make mistakes and, good intentions, but maybe bad efforts. This kind of questioning, this kind of lingering anxiety and fear, listen, puts one at such a dis-ease that, listen, they struggle to feel that they can trust or fully rely on the other person. And listen, this person often has difficulties with setting up boundaries. This is the person, listen, that sometimes will view the space, healthy space that you may have between them is a threat. It's like, well, why do you want to be so far? Why do you want to be so distant? And in all honesty, it's their own anxiety that says, I don't know that this is trustworthy. And sometimes, listen, this is the kind of thing that can also affect one's self-worth. I said in the beginning, when we talk about secure attachments, these are often people that have good confidence about themselves. When you get into this one, this ambivalent attachment, listen, they have low self-esteem often. Their sense of self-worth is often based upon how the other person feels about them. And so if they have relationships in which they don't really feel like the person is as happy and secure or confident, it's easy for them to feel like, then what is that about me? Versus maybe the other person has some things they need to work on. And this is not about me. Sometimes they can need constant reassurance and lots of attention from the other person. This is why sometimes they can feel very clingy. And listen, if this fits you, once again, this is not a problem. The only problem is that when I don't accept and acknowledge that this is the challenge, and then because then I don't do anything about it. Listen, we're talking about unpacking the baggage, but I've got to understand what's in it so that I might know how to unpack it. Listen, the person that is ambivalent, listen, when they're parenting, listen, they can be inconsistent, sometimes, listen, intrusive, right? Because, listen, it's the lack of comfort and safety and security. And so therefore, listen, sometimes this shows up in controlling behavior. Sometimes this shows up in blaming behaviors. They can be erratic. These are the kind of things that affects how one may bond with us. Why is it that certain people seem to keep their distance from us and we see it as them not wanting to be with us, but in all honesty, we're too clingy. But why are we so clingy? Because we don't feel comfortable in the space that sometimes the other person may need in being in a healthy relationship with us. And so listen, this is why it's important that you and I understand this. Here's another one that's important for you and I to look at. Notice this one. Notice this one right here. It is the avoidant dismissive attachment. The avoidant dismissive attachment person. Now, this person, listen, is not trying to have closeness. They're trying to avoid emotional connection. Now, sometimes we see this with people who are the introvert, but listen, this is a little different component in which, listen, they rather not rely on others or have others rely on them. Why? Because their whole thing is keep your distance, keep your distance, keep your distance. I listen, and there's a healthy place when you talk about the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. But this is where we get into the unhealthiness of that introvert, possibly. Why? Because listen, it's difficult for them to tolerate emotional intimacy. This is the kind of person, listen, that feels like when you're asking questions to help create a bond, to be able to create the intimacy. Intimacy is like into me, you see. They will feel like you're being intrusive. They would feel like, listen, you're asking too many questions. This isn't about developing a relationship. This is an interrogation. They feel like they're being scrutinized. The light is on them. And listen, this is the kind of person that although they may value their independence and their freedom, the reality is that when it comes to intimacy and it comes to closeness, they struggle here. And what I'm saying to you is, listen, the more this person, or may I say, the more that the other person is trying to get close to them and trying to really develop this intimate relationship with them, the more that they tend to withdraw, the more that they seem to be uncomfortable. They seem to be more distant. They seem to be more kind of standoffish. Listen, it can get to the point that where it becomes rigid and it becomes difficult. And so sometimes people are like, I want to have close people. I want to have people that, listen, when something happens, I can call and I can really pour my heart out to. But if I haven't worked on this outside of a crisis, I haven't worked out on this outside of some kind of moment where I really need people, then this becomes difficult in a moment when I am really feeling like I want somebody that I can connect to, somebody that I can have this sort of real heart emotional exchange. And I'm telling you that sometimes these are the kind of things that we've got to work through because, listen, this is the kind of person that want to keep secrets. This is the kind of person that, listen, they want to make sure that they are less and less engaging. And so for them, there's freedom in keeping this sort of distance. But in all honesty, when they really need somebody, that's when they hurt the most. But they have the most difficult time in trying to connect because now it really requires them to unveil themselves and to really allow somebody in. And the reality is that most of the time they don't think that they need this until they really do. And this can be difficult in a marriage. This can be difficult in an up and close personal relationship in which you're feeling like, I'm sharing myself and I'm giving this and they just seem like they're not sharing anything. They're not giving anything. And I'm telling you that it may be because they have some bonding issues. They have some attachment challenges. And unless they work through them, you may be in that sort of tension until they can really come to a place where they're willing to work through the issues that creates this kind of avoidant, dismissive attachment. Listen, I'm telling you that I really do hope that the kind of things that we have unveiled today has really just kind of poured out some real reality about not only is attachment and cleaving and bonding important, but when we recognize the challenges that have sometimes been there along the way, that we can address them, that we can recognize them, and we can begin to do something about them. Because at the end of the day, as much as this may have been something that happened in my time in developing over the course of my younger years. The reality is that now in my older years, in my latter years, in my adult years, I can do something about it, because a problem that's well defined is a problem that's half solved. And so I may need to really do some internal soul work to really work on how I can have the kind of attachments, I can have the kind of bonding, I can have the kind of cleaving that brings the kind of emotional, not just stability, not just fulfillment, but the kind of emotional attachments that cause my relationships to flourish and to pop and to really flourish, because I have worked through the challenges, I've learned the principles, and now I can give the application that allows my attachment to be healthy and wholesome for those that matter. That's right. It is important that you and I learn how to have the kind of attachments that make relationships worthwhile. Now listen, I just want to thank you not only for you being here today, but listen, I want to thank you for partnering with us. Now listen, as you are looking on the screen, listen, we want you to partner with us. Now you may say, how can you partner with us? Listen, there are several different financial ways in which you can do that. So whether it is through the Cash App, as you see there on the screen, whether it is through PayPal, whether it is through the check or money order. But listen, we want to let you know that, listen, we appreciate that you've been here today, and we hope that this has really helped move the needle in your relationship, in your understanding for yourself. Now, if this has really moved the needle in relationship to those that are close to you, those that you say, hey, man, this is something I need to be able to share, we need to be able to go over, hey, wonderful. But I'm telling you, listen, if you has made a difference for you, then I would ask that you would make an investment into us, because we have made an investment into you. And so here, as you see, once again, you can send a check or money order to Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. You can do that through PayPal, LEC at let-god.org, or you can do that at Cash App at LifeEmpowermentCh. But listen, we thank you for you being here. We thank you for your investment with us today. And listen, and we hope that not only has this been an investment that has been worthwhile for you, but listen, we hope that this has been an investment that has been worthwhile for your relationship. And so listen, I thank you. I appreciate you. Now listen, go forward and have that relationship, have that attachment, have that bond, have that cleaving that causes your relationship to pop and to flourish. And so we thank you. Once again, this is Pastor and Therapist Marcus, and I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday as we will unpack another bag that helps us to live a more fulfilling relationship with those that are most meaningful to us. God bless you.